My brother slept with my girlfriend of 3 years, got her pregnant before we even broke up, and secretly married her at a courthouse while I was away at college. Later, he called me laughing, and when I finally confronted him at our mom's house, he just smirked and said, "You snooze. You lose." She picked the better brother. That was the day I cut them both out of my life for good. Hey, Reddit. So yesterday I dropped a bomb at my dad's funeral that's been 28 years in the making. My brother Jake stole my girlfriend, got her pregnant while we were still together, married her behind my back, and spent 3 decades thinking he got away with it. Spoiler alert, he didn't. And the fallout has been absolutely nuclear. Before I get into what happened yesterday, you need the full backstory because this isn't just some petty family drama. This is 28 years of calculated manipulation, abuse, and lies finally catching up to someone who thought he was untouchable. The words left my mouth before I fully registered saying them. The reception hall at St. Michael's Community Center went dead silent. Not the kind of quiet where people gradually notice something interesting is happening. This was instant vacuum of sound. Forks stopped midair. My cousin Andrew choked on his water. Margaret's hand flew to her pearls like I just announced I was running for office on a platform of arson. Jake's face went completely white. Jessica, sitting next to him in that black dress she probably thought made her look dignified, froze with her glass halfway to her lips. I kept going, because once you start a thing like this, you don't pump the brakes halfway through. Every single thing, I said, my voice carrying across the 63 people who showed up to mourn my father. And I want you both to know Dad knew too. He knew for the last 3 years. He made sure the right people would find out when the time came. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked past my daughter Olivia's horrified expression, past my wife Amanda's knowing nod, and straight out the door into the October afternoon. Behind me, I heard Jake's chair scrape against the floor. Jessica's voice rose in panic. Confusion rippled through a family that had spent nearly 3 decades pretending everything was fine. 24 hours later, their entire lives would collapse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that moment meant everything, why I waited 28 years for it, you need to understand what Jake took from me. Not just Jessica, not just my youth or my trust or my ability to love without suspicion. He took my entire understanding of who I was supposed to be in this world. I was 21 when it happened, junior at Stanford studying computer science back when that meant something different than it does now. This was the early 90s when knowing how to code actually meant something special, before every other person claimed to be a developer after a weekend boot camp. Jessica Miller was the first woman I ever loved genuinely and deeply. In that way young men love when they haven't yet learned that love requires more than just intensity. She was brilliant, funny, had this way of looking at the world that made everything seem brighter. We met in high school during a physics lab, where she was the only one who didn't treat me like a nerd for actually understanding the equations. She was heading toward medical school even then, talking about becoming a pediatric surgeon, about helping kids who couldn't help themselves. We'd been together since senior year of high school, making it work through college. She was pre-med at Berkeley, and we made the long-distance work through late-night phone calls that lasted until 3 a.m. and weekend visits that cost me most of my campus job earnings. I worked at the campus bookstore 20 hours a week just to afford the gas money to drive and see her every other weekend. My roommate used to joke that I was more committed to those drives than to my actual classes. My hands still remember the feel of hers, the way she'd trace circles on my palm during long car rides. Not saying anything, just connecting. Those little moments of intimacy that you don't appreciate until they're gone, and you realize you'd give anything to feel them again. She had this laugh that started quiet and built until it took over her whole body. Making her laugh became my primary ambition in life. We talked about marriage constantly, about kids, about the house we'd buy someday with good schools and yard space for a dog. She wanted 2 kids, maybe 3. We'd even picked out names. We had a 5-year plan. Graduate, get jobs in the Bay Area, she'd finish med school, we'd get married, start our lives together. That plan was so real to me I could taste it. Jake was 2 years younger, a freshman at community college because he'd never had the grades for anything else. Our parents pretended this didn't bother them, but I saw the way Dad's eyes lit up when he talked about my classes versus the way they deflected when Jake mentioned his. The comparison was always there, unspoken but obvious. Jake saw it too, and he hated it. He started asking about Jessica during my sophomore year. Casual questions at first. How's she doing? What's she studying? I thought he was being a good brother. Looking back, I was handing him the blueprint for stealing her. I told him everything. Her favorite restaurants, the movies that made her cry, the way she loved surprises but hated uncertainty. Every detail that would later become ammunition. Christmas break of my junior year. Jake announced he was hanging out with Jessica while I was busy studying. Just keeping her company, he said. She must get lonely with you gone all the time. He said it with this concerned expression, like he genuinely cared about her well-being. Like he was doing me a favor by making sure my girlfriend wasn't lonely. I actually thanked him for being thoughtful. Can you believe that? I thanked him for the opportunity to steal my girlfriend. Our parents beamed at how close their sons were, how Jake was stepping up to help his brother, how wonderful it was that we all got along so well. Mom actually said she was proud of how mature we both were, how adult, how rare it was for brothers to be so supportive of each other. The signs were everywhere, but I was too trusting, too in love, too blind to see them. Jessica stopped answering calls as quickly, before she'd pick up on the first or second ring. Suddenly it was going to voicemail, getting callbacks hours later. Her voice on the phone grew distant, distracted. Conversations that used to flow naturally started feeling forced, like she was going through the motions because she had to, not because she wanted to. She started cutting conversations short, citing exhaustion from studying, from work, from life in general. Before we could talk for hours about nothing and everything. Suddenly 15 minutes was pushing it. She'd yawn, say she needed sleep, promise to call tomorrow. Tomorrow would come and I'd be the one calling her. When I visited in February, she flinched when I touched her shoulder, actually physically recoiled like I was a stranger who'd gotten too close. That should have been my wake-up call right there, but I was determined to make excuses for it. Just stressed, she said. Medical school applications are brutal. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative that something was wrong, that she was pulling away, that maybe I wasn't enough was too painful to examine directly. The call came on a Thursday in March. I remember because I'd just aced my algorithms midterm and was planning to call Jessica to celebrate. She answered on the first ring. That should have been my first clue something was wrong. Ryan, I need to tell you something. The quality of her voice, flat and rehearsed like she'd reading from a script, told me everything before she said another word. I'm pregnant. It's Jake's. 2 words that tilted my world sideways. We've been seeing each other since Christmas. I'm sorry, but I love him. I'm marrying him next week at the courthouse. The rest came in a rush like she'd been holding her breath. His lease starts next month. We're moving in together. This is what's best for everyone. Click. 3 years compressed into 90 seconds in a dial tone. I called her back immediately. Voicemail. Called again, 17 times total. Each time hoping she'd answer. Each time getting that same cheerful voicemail message we'd recorded together months ago. A recording from a different lifetime. My roommate found me on the floor of our dorm room at 2 a.m. still holding the phone, staring at a crack in the ceiling I'd never noticed before. He thought someone had died. In a way, someone had. I called Jake the next morning. He picked up on the 3rd ring, and the first thing I heard was laughter. Turkey gobble laughter. Long enough to figure it out, he said. She told me she'd been faking it with you for months. She said you were boring, predictable. Said being with me felt like actually living. I tried to say something. Words failed. You snooze, you lose, big brother. She chose the better man. Deal with it. The line went dead. I drove home that weekend. 5-hour blur of rage and disbelief. The radio played songs I couldn't hear. Other cars passed me without registering. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Stayed white for days afterward. When I confronted Jake at our parents' house, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He was sprawled on the living room couch watching a basketball game, bag of chips open on his stomach. What do you want me to say? He actually shrugged. A lazy roll of his shoulders that made me want to break something. She chose the better brother. Get over it. She was mine. We had plans. We had a future. Had. Past tense. Sounds like you're catching up. He returned his attention to the screen. Close the door on your way out. Mom appeared in the doorway then, her face a wreck of guilt and helplessness. Dad stood behind her, jaw so tight I could see the muscle twitching. Neither of them said what I needed to hear. Neither of them told Jake he was wrong. That silence told me everything. My little brother had stolen my girlfriend, gotten her pregnant, and was going to marry her. And my parents were going to let it happen because addressing it would be uncomfortable. Because keeping the peace mattered more than keeping faith with the son who'd actually earned their respect. I walked out that day and didn't speak to any of them for months. Jake and Jessica got married at a courthouse the following week. No family invited, no ceremony. Just 2 people and a judge, and a lie they'd convinced themselves was love. I went back to Stanford and threw myself into my studies with the kind of manic intensity that probably concerned my professors. I graduated with honors, landed a job at a software company before the diploma was even printed, and moved across the country to Seattle. Physical distance from the wreckage of my old life. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving that year, or Christmas, or Easter. I sent my parents a card on their birthdays and called on Mother's Day and Father's Day because I wasn't ready to completely sever ties, but I wasn't ready to forgive either. They never asked me to reconcile with Jake. Maybe they knew it was pointless. Maybe they were just relieved not to deal with the tension. Jake and Jessica had their first kid in October. Ethan, my nephew. I found out from an aunt who thought surely I'd want to know. I sent a card with $50 in it because that felt like the minimum socially acceptable response. Didn't sign it, didn't write a message, just cash and a store-bought card with congratulations printed in cursive font. A second kid came 3 years later. Caleb. Same response from me. Same emptiness. By then I'd met Amanda. She was a civil engineer working on a project adjacent to one of ours. Smart, funny, patient with my baggage in a way that suggested she had some of her own. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Got married in a small ceremony in her hometown with her family and my college friends. I invited my parents. They came. They didn't bring Jake or Jessica or ask if they could. That was the agreement we'd silently reached. They could have a relationship with me or they could have Jake's family events, but not both in the same room. Amanda and I had Olivia a year into our marriage. She's the best thing I've ever done. Smart like her mother, stubborn like me with this fierce sense of justice that probably comes from growing up hearing carefully edited versions of why she only has grandparents on one side of the family. The years passed. I built a career. Amanda built hers. Olivia grew up. We were happy in that quiet, unremarkable way that doesn't make for good stories, but makes for a good life. I thought about Jake sometimes. Wondered if he was happy. If Jessica was. If they ever felt guilty for what they'd done. Mostly, though, I just didn't think about them at all. Then, 3 years ago, Dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't negotiate. Stage 4. By the time they caught it, which meant months, not years, he called me himself to tell me. His voice on the phone sounded smaller than I remembered. Older. Mortal. That was the worst part, realizing that your parents aren't invincible. That time catches everyone eventually. I need to tell you some things, he said after the diagnosis talk was done. Before I can't anymore. Before the cancer or the medication takes away my ability to say what needs to be said. I flew out the next week. Left work on a Friday. Took emergency family leave. We met at a diner halfway between his house and the airport. Neutral territory. Not his house where the ghosts of family dinners past would hover. Not somewhere public enough that people would overhear. Just a quiet booth in a place that served decent coffee and didn't ask questions. He looked worse than I'd expected. Much worse. The photos Mom had been sending clearly didn't capture the full reality. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. His skin had that grayish tint people get when their organs are failing. Thinner. Grayer. Like someone had taken my father and made a rough draft sketch of him. All the details faded and imprecise. I should have said something, he started without preamble. No small talk. No easing into it. When Jake did what he did, I should have told him it was wrong. I should have stood up for you. I should have kicked him out of the house. I should have called Jessica's parents. I should have done something, anything, other than what I actually did, which was nothing. And that nothing has been eating at me for 28 years like its own kind of cancer. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and drank my coffee and waited for him to continue. There's more, he said. Things about Jake you don't know. Things I found out over the years. Things I should have told you but didn't. Because I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. Maybe I was being paranoid or judgmental. But I wasn't wrong. I was seeing exactly what was there. And I chose to look away. Because confronting it would have been uncomfortable. That's when he told me everything. And I mean everything. He laid it all out like he'd been rehearsing this conversation in his head for years. Waiting for the right moment. Or maybe just waiting until he had no choice but to speak. Jake didn't just steal Jessica. He systematically isolated her from everyone who'd ever cared about her. Her friends from high school stopped hearing from her within a year of the marriage. Her family got carefully managed visits where Jake was always present, always controlling the conversation. He systematically controlled her in ways that crossed every line from partnership into abuse. Financial abuse, emotional abuse, and Dad suspected physical abuse, though Jessica had gotten very good at hiding it. He'd been doing it since before they were married, and he'd gotten progressively worse over the years. Testing boundaries, seeing what he could get away with. Dad had seen bruises. On her arms where fingers had gripped too hard. On her wrists where she'd been grabbed. Once on her face, poorly covered with makeup that she insisted came from walking into a cabinet door. He'd heard raised voices through the walls during family visits. Heard Jessica crying in the bathroom. Heard Jake's voice low and threatening, the words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable. He'd watched Jessica's spark dim over the years, until she was a ghost of the woman I'd known. The bright pre-med student with plans to save the world had become someone who flinched at loud noises and checked her phone constantly, terrified of missing a text from Jake. Someone who asked permission before expressing an opinion. Someone who'd learned that the path of least resistance was to agree with whatever Jake said and disappear into herself. Dad had confronted Jake once, just once, about 3 years into the marriage, when the signs were too obvious to ignore. Jake had threatened to cut them off from seeing the grandkids entirely, said if Dad ever brought it up again, if he ever said one word to Jessica about his suspicions, they'd move across the country and change their number. The grandkids would grow up not knowing their grandparents even existed, so Dad stayed quiet and hated himself for it. Chose access to his grandchildren over protecting the daughter-in-law he knew was being abused. Every time he saw them after that, the guilt ate at him a little more. But there was more. Dad had found out that Jake had been stealing from their joint accounts. Small amounts at first, 50 here, 100 there, explained away as cash withdrawals for groceries or gas. Then larger ones as Jessica stopped questioning. 1,000 for a supposed car repair that never happened. 5,000 for an investment opportunity that somehow never materialized. Jake had a spending problem. Electronics he didn't need. Expensive watches. Designer clothes. All bought on credit he couldn't afford to repay. Worse, he'd taken out credit cards in Jessica's name without her knowledge. Forged her signature on loan applications. Ruined her credit score until she couldn't qualify for anything on her own. It was deliberate, calculated. Every move designed to trap her further. To make leaving harder. To ensure she had nowhere to go, even if she wanted to escape. And then the thing that made my blood run cold. That made me understand just how methodical Jake's manipulation had been from the very beginning. Dad had found evidence that Jake had intercepted letters. Letters from Jessica to me in the year after they got married. At least 3 letters. Probably more. Letters she'd written begging me to understand what really happened. To know that she never really chose him. To come find her. To help her escape before it was too late. She'd been smart about it. Saved cash from grocery money. Bought stamps at a post office in a different town. Mailed them from there so Jake wouldn't see. But Jake had found them somehow. Maybe went through her purse. Maybe followed her. Maybe she'd made one small mistake and he'd caught on. However it happened, he'd intercepted every single letter before it could reach me. Jake had collected them. Kept them in a box in his garage like trophies. Evidence of his victory. Proof that he'd stolen Jessica so completely that even her attempts to reach out for help had been thwarted. Dad found them when he was helping Jake move some furniture a few years back. Jake had left the garage door open, the box sitting on a shelf in plain sight. Maybe he'd gotten cocky. Maybe he thought no one would look. But Dad had seen his handwriting on the box label and gotten curious. Inside were the letters from Jessica to me. Letters from me to Jessica from those first few months after the breakup, also intercepted somehow. And a journal. Jake's own journal. Pages of it, detailing his plan to steal Jessica. How he'd studied her. Learned her patterns. Figured out exactly what to say and when to say it. How he deliberately created situations where she was vulnerable, and he was there to comfort her. How he'd used every piece of information I'd told him about her against us both. It was all laid out. The whole calculated campaign. Nothing about it had been spontaneous or natural. It was premeditated theft of another person's life. Dad had photographed everything with his phone, made digital copies, kept them backed up in 3 different places. When he got sick, he put physical copies in his safety deposit box, along with written documentation of everything he'd observed over the years. Dates, times, descriptions of bruises, recordings of arguments. He'd been collecting evidence for years, too much of a coward to use it while he was healthy, but determined that it would come out eventually. "I need you to have these," Dad said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the diner table. His hands shook slightly. Whether from the cancer or the weight of what he was handing over, I couldn't tell. "When the time comes, when you're ready, I need you to make this right. I can't do it myself. I'm running out of time and courage both. But you can. You were always the strong one, Ryan. The good one. The one who knew right from wrong and had the spine to act on it. Make him answer for what he did. Not just to you. To Jessica. To Kyle. To everyone. Kyle. Jessica's younger brother. That was the other thing Dad told me that night. Kyle had figured out what was going on. Had confronted Jake about the abuse. Had threatened to help Jessica leave. To expose everything. 2 weeks later, Kyle was dead. Hiking accident, they said. Fell from a cliff during a solo trip. But Jake had been on that same trail that same day. Witnesses had seen them arguing near the cliff edge. The police investigated but couldn't prove anything. Ruled it accidental. Closed the case. But Dad had kept digging. Had found text messages between Jake and Kyle that the police either missed or chose to ignore. Threatening messages from Jake. Warnings to mind his own business. Implications that something bad might happen if Kyle didn't back off. The messages had been deleted from Jake's phone, but Kyle had backed his up to a cloud account that his parents had access to after he died. Jessica's parents had shown them to Dad years ago. They suspected, but could never prove. Couldn't bear to push it because they'd already lost one child, and they couldn't risk losing their daughter too by accusing her husband of murder. I sat in that diner booth reading document after document, text message printouts, journal photocopies, a timeline Dad had constructed showing every piece of evidence, every incident, every moment that proved Jake wasn't just a cheating asshole, but a methodical abuser, and quite possibly a murderer. I took the envelope, read every word of it that night in my hotel room, sat up until 4 a.m. going through page after page. Each one was a knife in my chest. Jessica writing about being trapped, about being scared, about Jake's temper, about the pregnancy being accidental at first, then later deliberately how Jake had sabotaged her birth control without her knowledge, because a baby would ensure she couldn't leave, about the baby being her chain. Please don't give up on me, one letter from 1994 ended. Please. I'll wait however long it takes. I know you probably hate me. I know you probably never want to see me again. But if there's any part of you that remembers what we had, please come find me. I'm so scared, and I don't know how much longer I can survive this. But I'd never gotten them. Never had the chance to respond. Never knew she'd tried to reach me. Jake had made absolutely certain of that. I asked Dad why he didn't go to the police with all this. Why he didn't help Jessica himself. Why he sat on evidence of abuse and possible murder for years without acting. I was a coward, he said simply. His voice was flat, matter of fact. He wasn't making excuses. I told myself it wasn't my place, that maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed, that if I just stayed quiet and kept the peace, everyone would be fine. I told myself the police had already investigated Kyle's death and found nothing, so what could I possibly add? I told myself that maybe Jessica was staying because she wanted to, that it was her choice, that interfering would just make things worse. He looked at me then, with eyes that held 3 decades of regret. I was wrong about all of it. I was a coward who chose comfort over courage, who chose keeping the family together on the surface over actually protecting the people in it. And now I'm dying and I can't fix it, but maybe you can. Maybe you can be the person I should have been. We spent the next 2 years staying in touch more than we had in decades. Phone calls every week, visits every month when his health allowed it. Dad's health declined in stages. Good weeks where he almost seemed like his old self. Bad weeks where the cancer and chemo left him too weak to leave bed. And then just bad weeks and worse weeks as the good days stopped coming entirely. He made me promise I'd wait until he was gone to do anything with the information he'd given me. Made me swear it. I can't face it, he admitted during one of our last real conversations, when the morphine had loosened his tongue enough to be fully honest. Can't watch it all fall apart. That makes me even more of a coward, I know. Can't even face the consequences of finally doing the right thing. But I need you to be the one who's brave enough to tell the truth when I'm not around to see the fallout. Wait until I'm gone. Then burn it all down. Make sure everyone knows what he did. Promise me. I promised. He died on a Tuesday in October. 68 years old. Pancreatic cancer finally won the fight it was always going to win. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday. 4 days to sit with everything he'd told me. 4 days to plan exactly what I was going to say and when. Mom called me to help with arrangements. I said yes. Flew out with Amanda. Olivia met us there. The service was at St. Michael's, the church Dad had attended sporadically for 40 years. The reception was in the community center attached to it. Jake was there, of course. Jessica, too. Looking older, but not necessarily wiser. Ethan came with his girlfriend, Nina. Caleb flew in from Alaska, where he'd moved to get away from his father. That should have told me something right there. When your kid moves to literally the farthest state from you geographically, there's usually a reason. Olivia cornered me during the reception. My daughter is 19 now, studying psychology at Berkeley, and she's got her mother's talent for reading people and my tendency toward directness. You need to talk to Uncle Jake, she said, for the family's sake, for Grandpa's memory. Whatever happened between you two was almost 30 years ago. Don't you think it's time to let it go? I looked at her. My smart, beautiful daughter who had no idea what she was asking, who thought family meant unconditional forgiveness, who believed that time healed all wounds, and that being the bigger person was always the right choice. No, I said simply. Dad, please. Just talk to him. Say something. Anything. This silent treatment has gone on long enough. She grabbed my hand, led me across the room to where Jake and Jessica were sitting at a table in the corner. They saw us coming. Jessica's face went carefully neutral. Jake's got that fake smile he always puts on when he's trying to look like a reasonable person. Olivia made some pleasantries, asked about the grandkids, mentioned how good it was that we were all together for such a sad occasion. The kind of small talk that's meant to build bridges, but usually just highlights how far apart the shores really are. Then she looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to take the olive branch she was offering and do something conciliatory with it, to be the bigger person, to forgive, to move on. And that's when I said it, looking Jake dead in the eyes. Then Jessica, making sure they both heard every word clearly. I know what you did to Kyle. The color drained from both their faces simultaneously. Kyle was Jessica's younger brother, the one who died in a hiking accident 5 years ago. At least that's what everyone had been told. I know what you did to Kyle, I repeated. Every single thing. And I want you both to know Dad knew too. He knew for the last 3 years. He made sure the right people would find out when the time came. Then I walked away. The thing about dropping bombs is that the explosion isn't immediate. There's always a delay, a moment where the world holds its breath before everything detonates. I got in my rental car, drove back to the hotel. Amanda was already there, having left the reception early with a headache that was probably more diplomatic than medical. I told her what I'd done. Good, she said simply. It's about time. The first call came an hour later. Mom, sobbing, demanding to know what I meant, what I was talking about, why I would say something so horrible at my own father's funeral. I told her to check Dad's safety deposit box, the one at First National Bank downtown, the one she had access to as his widow. Everything she needed to know was in there. She hung up on me. The second call came from Jessica. Her voice was shaking. What did your father tell you? She asked. Everything, I said. About the letters you sent me that Jake intercepted. About the financial abuse. About Kyle. All of it. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, almost a whisper. Thank you. She hung up. The third call came from Ethan, my nephew who I'd met maybe 5 times in 28 years, who'd grown up hearing some version of the story where his Uncle Ryan was the bitter older brother who couldn't get over ancient history. Is it true? He asked. About my dad? Yes, I said. All of it. Mom's packing a bag, he said. She's leaving. Finally leaving. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. For everything. For not fighting harder. For not reaching out. For believing his lies about you. Tell her she doesn't owe me an apology, I said. Tell her I should have tried harder to find her. Tell her I'm sorry it took this long. More silence. Then, what happened to Uncle Kyle? This was the part I'd been dreading. The part Dad had told me about in hushed tones during one of our last conversations. The part that had made him cry for the first time since I was a kid. Kyle had found out about Jake's abuse, confronted him, threatened to tell everyone, to help Jessica leave, to expose everything. Jake had followed him on a hiking trip. They'd argued at the edge of a cliff, and Kyle had fallen, or been pushed. The evidence wasn't conclusive. The police ruled it an accident. But Dad had found text messages, threatening texts from Jake to Kyle in the days before the trip. Texts that Jake had deleted, but that Dad had recovered from an old phone backup. Dad had given everything to James Wilson, a friend from college who'd gone on to become a federal prosecutor. Told him to wait until after the funeral to look into it officially, to give the family time to mourn one loss before dealing with another. I told Ethan the truth, all of it. He deserved to know what his father really was. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that broke my heart. I always knew something was wrong, he said. Mom was always so scared, always walking on eggshells. I just didn't know what to do about it. I was just a kid, and then I wasn't a kid anymore, but I still didn't know how to help her. You can help her now, I said. Be there for her. Support her. She's going to need it. 24 hours after I walked out of that reception hall, everything collapsed exactly the way Dad had planned it. Mom went to the bank, found the safety deposit box. Inside were copies of everything. The intercepted letters, the financial documents showing Jake's fraud, the recovered text messages between Jake and Kyle, a detailed account Dad had written of everything he'd witnessed over the years, every bruise he'd seen on Jessica, every time she'd flinched, every excuse Jake had made. There was also a letter from Dad to Mom, apologizing for his silence, begging her to make things right, asking her to support Jessica in leaving, to help her rebuild, to be the partner to her that he should have been. Mom called Jessica that afternoon. They talked for hours. By evening, Mom had helped Jessica move into a hotel. By the next day, she'd helped her find a lawyer. A good one. The kind who specializes in cases like this. James Wilson called me that same day. Said he'd reviewed everything Dad had given him. That there was enough evidence to reopen Kyle's case. That Jake would be facing questions from the police very soon. That even if they couldn't prove Kyle's death was murder, the financial crimes alone would likely result in charges. Your father was meticulous, James said. He documented everything. It's like he spent the last 3 years of his life building an airtight case. He did, I said. That's exactly what he did. Jake was arrested a week later. Not for Kyle's death yet, but for the financial crimes. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. The list went on. His bail was set high enough that he couldn't make it. Sat in county jail while the investigation into Kyle continued. Jessica filed for divorce, got a restraining order, moved in with Ethan temporarily while she figured out her next steps. Mom sold Dad's house and split the proceeds with Jessica, saying it was the least she could do after years of enabling Jake's behavior through her silence. Caleb flew back from Alaska, reconnected with his mother for the first time in years, started therapy to deal with growing up in a household where violence was normal. Ethan did the same. And me? I went back to Seattle, back to my life. But something had shifted. The weight I'd been carrying for 28 years, the weight of betrayal and unanswered questions and wondering if I could have done something different, it was lighter now, not gone. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the person who caused it gets what they deserve, but lighter, manageable. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.